if you have a Rosh Hashanah machzor, that will obviously help. Okay. I'm going to try to share. I'm going to share my screen, but I'm also going to try to share a link with you, which has the a guide that we just put together for davening at home on Rosh Hashanah. So hold on one second. Let me just try to share it. Give me 1 second. Share. Okay, so I'm going to try to put it in the chat box right now. You can let me know if that works when you try to open it, but I'm also going to share my actual screen. If for whatever reason it doesn't work, if you can't access the link that I just sent, first of all, we're going to send it out in email form. But also what we're going to do is I'm going to share my screen right now so you can follow along directly with the guide. So hopefully you'll have the guide, which is relatively straightforward. It's actually interesting. When I was doing it, I was thinking, you know what, the guide's actually more important for Pesach and Shavuos, even though there's so much less davening. But on Pesach and Shavuos, you're fumbling around in the siddur trying to find the right tefillot, and it could be a little bit confusing if you're at home. But for Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur, you got the machzor here, right? The machzor just tells you exactly what to do almost in all cases. There are some complications and some things that you can only do at home that you can't do without a minion, and we're going to go through some of those things. Okay, Faye is saying it's telling you you need an account to access the Google Docs. I don't know. Has anyone else tried to access that doc that I put? Did it work for other people? No?
I think you have to have a Google account. I know when I've accessed other things, they always ask me for my Google email.
I have a Google account. I think it wasn't shared.
It wasn't shared. I shared it, but I didn't do it. I must have not pressed the right thing, but I thought I did. Hold on 1 second. Let me see. Let me try it one more time. Share. Hold on.
I'm sorry. Rabbi?
Yes.
The guide that was put out by Maharat and Jofa, a long thing for Rosh Hashanah and everything, part of it is the Home Tefillah guide that goes with Art Scroll, Birnbaum, and Koren and all the pages. Are you using something similar to that?
No, we made our own guide. The only thing is, for some reason, I'm not being successful in sharing it. Like, in other words, I'm trying. Okay, hold on 1 second.
Your guide.
Hold on 1 second. Let me see. It's possible I just shared it in the wrong way. Give me 1 second. Change the link. Okay, so what we'll have to do is, because I can't figure it out, either you can email me after the class and I will send it to you, but right now you will be able to actually follow along because I'm going to share it on my screen in 1 second. Hold on 1 second. Okay, so let me go back to this. And we will send out this as an email and share it. It's just that I must be saving it incorrectly on my Google Drive or something like that, or saving it in the wrong way because I'm not exactly sure why that's not happening. Anyways, let me try to share my screen with you. Okay, so now you should see the screen. Everybody see the screen? You can give me a thumbs up if you can see it. Okay, so we're going to go through this. We're also going to go through the machzor itself. Before we go, I want to make sure that I address everyone's questions. This is not like going to be so frontal. I mean, this is the idea here is to be able to respond if people have specific questions or specific things that they're wondering about or worried about in terms of davening alone. So if you have any questions, let me know right now. That might be a good a good thing, and I'll make sure that as I go through my presentation, either I'll address it right away after you ask the question, or I'll make sure to address it in my in the course of the presentation. So if you have any questions, please let me know, or as I said, you can just put them in the chat. Earphones are not working either. Okay. Any questions? All right, let me open up my chat box. Okay. Okay, so we're going to start with this document right here that I have before you. I believe you can probably see my cursor, so I'm going to use my cursor and we start. Obviously, we're going to start on Erev Rosh Hashanah. We'll start with Erev Rosh Hashanah in the beginning of the Machzor. So the first thing that will be important, which is first thing that we have in the Machzor is on page 2, okay? Hataras Nedarim. Probably many people do not do Hataras Nedarim on a regular Erev Rosh Hashanah. Hataras Nedarim is actually very similar to Kol Nidre, but actually from a halachic perspective, it actually fulfills your obligation a lot more. The idea of both Kol Nidre and Hataras Nedarim is revoking of vows. It's this concept of going into the high holidays and saying, look, words are very, very important. And we have to take our words very seriously. And if for whatever reason we made a vow and we can't keep it, we have to go through a whole process. We can't just like give up on what we said. It's, oh, I changed my mind. There's no such thing in Judaism. I just changed in my mind, especially if you've made a commitment to do something. And so consequently, the way to get around it would be what's called Hataras Nedarim. And what typically happens is in Shul on Erev Rosh Hashanah in the morning, after davening is over, we will set up a Beit Din, an ad hoc Beit Din of 3 people, and then everybody else will recite this whole thing. For this year, a lot of poskim, a lot of rabbis are saying that you can do Hataras Nedarim over Zoom. So what will happen is we will set up we'll have the Zoom on. By the way, every time I talk about Zoom, unless there's some other conflict, and then it will be noted and very clear in our announcements, hopefully. We're in the Brody Zoom room, which is the same room that we're in right now. So what we're going to do is we're going to broadcast or live stream our davening, which we do every morning, but we're going to make sure, of course, to do it on Erev Rosh Hashanah. And then after Erev Rosh Hashanah, after Shachris, at approximately 7:20, we are going to have Hataras Nedarim, and you're welcome to join us for that. If you happen to have a shofar at home and you've been blowing shofar every morning of Elul, do not blow the shofar on Erev Rosh Hashanah. We do not blow the shofar on Erev Rosh Hashanah. So that is all that I have for Rosh Hashanah in the morning. Okay, we continue. Hold on one second, make sure my volume's up. Then Rosh Hashanah, Erev Rosh Hashanah in the afternoon, Mincha begins on page 30, and maybe I should just add that in. Mincha, page 30. Add it in right now as we're talking. So daven Mincha in the regular way that you would daven normal Mincha. And we don't say Tachnun because it's Erev Yantif. Whenever there's Erev Yantif, we don't say Tachnun. We do, as we do for every single holiday, include the David. The David is on page 56. The way that we do it at Beth Shalom, again, this is not required, it's just the custom of Beth Shalom, is that we always end every tefillah with Aleinu. So many shuls, you'll go to the shul and they'll do Aleinu, and then when there's an additional thing to say at the end, like let's say during the month of Elul, we add the David, Psalm 27, they'll throw it at the end of davening. And that's in fact where it appears in the Machzor in the Siddur. At Beth Shalom, we always do the David before Aleinu, but it doesn't matter. It's not that big of a deal, especially if you're davening at home. The idea of doing that is simply, you know, we have a concept of finishing everything with Aleinu, but it doesn't really matter, and you can do it however you want to do it. and just follow the machzor, and everything will flow correctly. So that's basically Erev Rosh Hashanah. Really no big deal there. No surprises. You're just following along the machzor. Okay, Faye says in the chat, I have the article machzor Nusach Ashkenaz. Aside from finding the correct page numbers, any changes? There are some changes. Actually, as we'll see a little bit later on, one of the biggest changes for Rosh Hashanah between Ashkenaz and Sfard actually will not apply when you're davening at home. And that big change is that Nusach Sfard, what we do at Beis Shalom, we do shofar blasts during the silent Amidah. We do it during the silent, and then we again do it during the repetition. But Nusach Ashkenaz only does it during the repetition. But that's not going to matter for you at home, as I'm going to talk about later on, that even if you happen to have a shofar at home, and you know how to blow the shofar, we do not blow the shofar during the silent, when you're without a minyan. The idea of blowing the shofar is a unique mitzvah. It's special, and it specifically refers to the idea of being in a minyan. The idea of blowing the shofar during the Amidah, okay? Whether it's the silent or it's the repetition. It's something called, that the Gemara and the halachic literature refers to as tkiyot al haseder, which means when we blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, we have the blast that we do before Musaf, right? After Torah reading, before we go into Musaf, we have one set of blasts. Those are called the tkiyot demiyushav, the sitting down ones. We actually don't sit down, we stand for them. But actually the Sfardim do sit for them. Those are called the sitting down ones. The reason why they're called the sitting ones is because we're not in the Amidah, we're not standing, we're not doing the repetition. Those are actually not the primary shofar blasts that we do on Rosh Hashanah. So if you have your machzor open in front of you, maybe I'll just demonstrate this a little bit easier by showing it to you in the actual machzor. So the first set of blasts that we do, again, on Shabbos, we don't do any of the blasts. This is all going to be on Sunday. But that first set of blasts that we do, I'm sorry for jumping around a little bit here, but I think it's important to make this point, are the blasts that we do on page 432, 434, right? That first set, when everyone's excited and everyone's ready to come in, and we finally do this, and we say, Lam Natzech B'nei Korach Mizmor 7 times. We do all these different things. And then we blow that shofar the first time. That first set of blasts, which are called the Tkiyos Demiyushav, the Gemara says the only reason we blow them is Kidei La'arvev HaSatan, which means to mix up the Satan. In other words, Satan thinks, okay, we've already done our job. We're not, now Satan won't be like looking at us anymore. Satan won't be careful and trying to be mekatreg, be bringing accusations against us. So then when we actually start the Shemona Esrei, the Amidah, and whether we're in Nusach Sfard, like what we do is that we do the blast during the silent, and then we do, and again during the repetition, or whether you're Nusach Ashkenaz and you only do it during the repetition, those are the main blasts, what's called Tkiyos al Haseder, the ones that are actually done as part and parcel of the repetition. But the halachic authorities say that those blasts, unlike the blasts that you do before Musaf starts, the blasts that are actually interwoven into the Amidah or into the repetition, those blasts you actually do need a minyan for. I mean, what I'm saying right now is probably not relevant to most of the people here, because even if you're davening at home, you also probably don't have your own shofar or know how to blow a shofar. But it's very likely that there are people who are home who do have a shofar and do know how to blow. And they would say, you know what, since I know how to blow, why don't I blow in the middle of my silent Amidah? And the Shulchan Aruch explicitly says that this should not be done, because those blasts in the middle of the silent Shemona Esrei, there's no repetition, obviously, if you're davening without a minyan. I mean, that's obvious. But even the blasts that are during the silent are not done if you're without a minyan. So what you would do if you happen to have a shofar at home is you would do the blast before, and then instead of doing blast during, you could do as many blasts as you want after. So the custom is to do 100. That's like, you know, the ideal, if you will. So you do 30 before, and then if you have the strength, you can do 70 after, or you can do another 30. That would be a typical thing. You know, a lot of the poskim are saying that for this year, especially in Shul, in Shul, we're only going to be doing 60 blasts. We're going to be doing 30 before and 30 during the repetition. That's all we're going to be doing. So we did send out a guy, and if you didn't get it, let me know. It was in this big email that we just sent out a day or two with the high holidays. It had a shofar blast schedule and different communities, different neighborhoods, different street corners where the shofar would be blown. If you got it and it did not have, you know, a place that was accessible for you and you want us to try to do another one, please let me know. Let me know, let Rabbi Cooper know, or let Brian Funt. He was the one who organized the whole thing. That's actually a community-wide effort with all three shoals on 7 locks are doing that together, and there are shofar blowers from all the shoals. So that would be another thing in terms of the blowing of the shofar. But even if you have a shofar at home, if you're davening at home, what I'm saying is you do blow before Musaf. You can blow after. The idea of blowing during the Amidah itself, that is reserved for a minyan. That's like basically one of the only differences between davening with the minyan and davening without. Obviously, there are certain things you can't do. You can't do repetition. You can't do kedusha. You can't do kaddish. You can't do baruch hu. Those are just the regular things, the regular differences between davening at home and davening with the minyan. But in terms of like an actual big halachic difference with regarding the shofar blowing, that would be one of them. Okay. If anyone has any questions about anything I say, please unmute yourself and ask. My volume doesn't work so well. I'm trying to get that fixed. So if I don't hear you, just keep talking or put it in the chat box, and I'll try to answer your question. Okay. All right. So now moving along, we just did Erev Rosh Hashanah so far. We've only done Erev Rosh Hashanah. Here's my chart here. We had Rosh Hashanah morning, Erev Rosh Hashanah morning, that's Friday morning. We had Mincha. The way that this chart works, it goes by calendar day. Has Shachris and Musaf, then Mincha and Maariv. Okay, so on Friday, Shachris is just regular Shachris, weekday Shachris. Mincha is regular weekday Mincha. It's all in the Machzor there for you. Maariv is going to be the first Yom Tif special Rosh Hashanah stuff. We begin Maariv on page 60. This year, since the first night of Rosh Hashanah is also Friday night, we have Kabbalat Shabbat. But as we always have, whenever Yontif and Shabbat coincide with each other, or even if Chol HaMoed, Sukkot or Pesach would coincide with Shabbat, we have an abbreviated version of Kabbalat Shabbat, and that is reflected in the document. Of course, it's reflected in the Machzor, but we have here this abbreviated version of Kabbalat Shabbat. All of that, of course, can be done at home. By the way, I just want to say one thing about davening at home, which obviously I'm sure you all know, and a lot of people have experienced davening at home. This is, I think I wrote in one place in advertising this class, the how, what, where, when of davening at home. So in terms of the where of davening at home, you say at home. Yeah, that's kind of obvious, but no, there are still, even within home, there are restrictions. You know, for instance, the halacha is you cannot daven in a bathroom, or even if there's a bathroom door open and you are in the vicinity of it. So if you're in a room and there's a bathroom door, you should close the bathroom. Now, halachically, it might not be as important as it was 500 years ago, before they had running water and the way we have today, and toilets that flushed. But still, that's the prevalent custom. Close the bathroom door if you're at home. And the idea of having a makom miyuchad l'tefillah, a designated place for davening, just like we try to have a place in shul where we daven and we have the same seat and we try to sit there because it's supposed to enhance our kavanah. So all of our great authorities say that when you daven at home, you should try to have the same thing. If there's a special place, maybe a place that has meaning in the house, or a place where you can just know, where you can focus and you can have kavanah, obviously that's the place. Always, it's nice to daven in outside if you're able to daven outside. Another one of the advantages of being at home. So anyways, we have, for Friday night, we're going to have Kabbalat Shabbat. You're going to follow straight through the Machzor. Remember that since it's Shabbat, we have to have the special insertions for Shabbat. The only thing that can't be done without a minyan on Friday night is baruch hu. Everything else from Mariv of Rosh Hashanah night, besides for Baruch Hu and the Kaddishes, of course. You can't ever do Kaddish without a minyan. You can't do Baruch Hu without a minyan. You can't do Kedusha without a minyan, and you can't do repetition without a minyan. Those are the things that you can never do, that you cannot do with the minyan. But besides for that, everything else can be said on your own. By the way, as I was thinking about this, I was realizing and discovering, not that you want to do every single piece, and it's just natural that some parts of the davening are going to connect a little more, and there's a number of important statements from the Mishnah Berurah and others about how sometimes doing less with more kavanah is better than doing every single thing, and not having time or focus or being able to have kavanah. But the truth of the matter is, those people who are davening home this year will actually be able to daven more of the tefillah, because people who are davening in shul, we have multiple shifts. Everything will have to be rushed in a certain way. There's really no way around it, or else we won't be able to accommodate the amount of people who actually want to come. But when you're davening at home, there really are no restrictions on what can be done, and you have more time. So therefore, you're able to do all the tefillot. So all the tefillot basically for Mariv can be done, with the exception, of course, of Kaddish and Baruch Hu. I did put into this document little kavanas. So just little things to think about. And I tried to kind of, not all of them, but some of them actually specifically focus on the idea of davening at home. But one of the only special things that we do on Mariv of Rosh Hashanah, as opposed to a regular Mariv of any year, is on page 98. There's a beautiful parak of Tehillim 24, the David Mizmor. This is for if you're in a shul that has a chazan. This is normally the first piece, chazanish piece, that would be done in a shul. The David Mizmor, really said with a lot of passion. And we open up the ark. By the way, every time that it says something to open up the ark, obviously you don't have an ark at home, that's okay. It doesn't mean that you can't say the prayer. If you're in shul, you open up the ark. None of these prayers need the ark to be open in order to say that. We only open up the ark in shul to try to demonstrate, hey, this is a very important prayer. People rise if they can. But if you're at home, just because it says before open up the ark, don't be, then I can't do this one. Every single prayer, even if it says open the ark, you can still do it. Again, with the exception of the general things that you can't do, i.e. Kaddish, Kedusha, Baruch Hu, and the repetition. Those things in halacha are called dvarim shebikdusha. Those are things that actually require a minyan. But everything else you can do without the minyan. So Rabbi, I have a little kavanah there. Again,
Rabbi,
kavanas, I'm just putting it down there. I'll get to in a second, Frida. 1 second. When we David Mizmor, which is this thing on page 98, ask yourself, because one of the big deals about the David Mizmor is it's a parak of Tim. The reason why it's chosen is because one of the themes of Rosh Hashanah is Malchios, is making God king over us. And it's particularly on the night of Rosh Hashanah, that's a very, very big theme, the kingship of God, sovereignty of God. And in that context, we say this line, LaHashem ha'aretz umloa. To Hashem is the earth and its fullness. Everything really belongs to Hashem. It's the statement that everything belongs to Hashem. So I wrote there, ask yourself, what would it mean to treat the world even more as Hashem is the earth and all its fullness? What does it mean to, we go through life and some level we have that acceptance or realization, but how would our life change? How would we do things differently if we really a greater consciousness of Hashem? Like when I grew up, when I was in yeshiva, what people would do is if they would buy a new sefer, they'd buy a new book, and they would want to write their name in the book, they would write Lamed Hey Vav with a chupchik, Lamed Hey Chupchik Vav, and then you write your name. So it would say Lamed Hey Vav, Nissen Antine. What does it mean, Lamed Hey Vav? It stands for these words, La Hashem Ha'aretz Umloa, and then you say your name. Why would you inscribe your book with the words to Hashem is the rule, is that everything in the world belongs to Hashem? Because when you're writing down your name on a book, trying to say this is my book, this is my sefer, right? You're actually really saying no, it's really God's, but kind of it's entrusted to me, and it's a different kind of statement. It's a statement of saying that everything that I have here, it was given to me by God. I'm holding on to for God, but that obviously has implications in terms of sharing or being generous with what we have for other people. So that line actually comes from this special part that we say at night. Okay, that's Marv, the first night. Frida, you had a question before I go on to the Rosh Hashanah day, Shabbos morning.
If it says the ark is open, should we assume there that we should stand at that?
Hold on, I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Let me try to put these back in and see if it works. Hold on, sorry. Okay, now I think I'll be able to hear you better.
Okay, if it says, the ark is open, should we assume we should stand at that place for prayers when the ark will be open?
Yes,
okay.
If you can. I mean, the truth of the matter is I was just reading the halacha and it says that even in shul, when the ark is opened, we are not halachically required to stand. Everyone's, oh, you have to stand, which you should do, of course. It's a sign of respect. But the halacha is, when do you have to stand for the Sefer Torah? Only when the Sefer Torah is not bimkomo, when it's not in its place, when it's moving from one place to another. If that wouldn't be the case, then the entire time that the Sefer Torah was on the shulchan, everybody would have to stand the whole time. And we don't do that, of course. I mean, some people stand during the whole laning just for a different reason, but we only stand when the Torah is being transported from the ark to the shulchan. So Rav Elazar Melamed and other poskim I just read from him, though, but it's the clear halacha, is that we actually, when the ark opens, you don't have to stand. I think that's a very important thing to know, because a lot of times, especially on Yom Kippur, towards the end of the day, people aren't feeling well, or someone's a little bit more elderly. They shouldn't have any guilt at all. They shouldn't feel bad at all about the fact that they're sitting when the ark is open. You're allowed to sit when the ark is open. It's a sign of respect. It's a beautiful sign of respect. And if you're able to stand, it's a great thing to stand. But if you have difficulty with that, don't feel that no one should feel like they're doing the wrong thing. So certainly, obviously, when you're at home, if you're able to stand, you should, because that was the meaning of this prayer. There's the people, the rabbis who made the tefillah are trying to say, this is an important part. Let's stand for it. Let's focus on this particular part. Okay, so that would be Friday and Friday night. Now we get to Shabbos day, first day of Rosh Hashanah. If you turn to your machzor, we're gonna, start with morning blessings on page 156, 158. The morning from Shachris is very similar. Again, you have the machzor, so basically you're gonna follow right through. Again, we have the same general rules: no kaddish, no kedusha, no baruch hu, since you're on your own. And there isn't going to be a repetition. So here's something that I think would be significant. Again, I know that many people on the call here probably in many, many years or maybe never have experienced a high holiday davening being not in a minyan. This is such a challenging year, this whole idea of being not in shul. So it's obviously something that I've never experienced personally. I've never experienced the idea of not being at shul for the high holidays. And I was thinking, like, if I would not be able to come to shul and therefore can't do the repetition, what parts of the repetition would I feel I'm like particularly missing? So if you look in the repetition, hold on one second, let me just get to it. Let's skip ahead. This is for chakras. So if you look at the repetition for the first day, page 292, there are some very meaningful piyutim that people really connect to. I would say, for instance, the piyut, which is called Atahu Elokeinu, that's like a highlight on page 300. So you could read it in Hebrew, you could read it in English, but you can't do the repetition itself. So all you would do is you would do the silent Amidah, and then when you're done with your silent Amidah, you can pick out one or two of the prayers from the repetition, the piyutim, and you can say them. There's nothing wrong with saying the poems that we have inserted into the repetition, even though we don't do the repetition when we don't have a minyan, but there's nothing wrong with taking out some of those things. The only thing we can't do is kedusha from the repetition. And the Birkat Kohanim, the Kohen's blessing, which is going to be in Musaf. But all the rest of the parts of the repetition, you could say them as an individual, even though you don't do the repetition per se. But if you want to pull out one piyut, one poem, that's absolutely okay and makes a lot of sense. And something that I would encourage people to do, especially if you have time. So we're going to give 2 highlights of the repetition for chakras on day 1, 2 piyutim, which again, you can't do the repetition, but you can pull some of them out. I would say it's Atahu Elokeinu, only you are God on page 300. And on page 316, the Lekel Orech Din. This is a piyut that's talking about God as the lawyer, God who's Levochin Levavos, who knows everything. He's Yoshe Tehilos, God who sits on our prayers, B'Yom Din. This is all playing on the theme of Rosh Hashanah being Yom HaDin. So those are, I would say, are the 2 that I would pull out, if you will, from the repetition. From the repetition for day 2 of chakras, one that I think is a highlight on day 2. One of them that I would think is a highlight is hold on one second. Is the piyut called Melech Elyon. It's talking about the Supreme King, and one of the really cool things that we do in the middle, it's on page 352, has all of these praises of Hashem. And then what we do is in the middle of the piyut on page 356, we contrast Melech Elyon, meaning the Supreme King, with Melech Evyon, which means the destitute king or a king of flesh and blood. And it's just a way of contrasting Hashem and God. And it really goes on, and then it goes into another one, Hashem Melech, Hashem Malach, Hashem Yimlach, Hashem is king, will be king. Again, one of the big themes of Rosh Hashanah over and over again is Hashem's kingship over the world. And that's chakras, that's the repetition. We jumped a little bit to day 2 also just now, but basically chakras is the same as it would be in Shul, obviously without a repetition, but there's nothing wrong. And in fact, I think it's a beautiful thing to take 1 or 2 of the piyutim of these poems. I just gave you a few examples, and to say them on your own, even though it's not part of the repetition. Okay, then after the repetition is over, we jump to page 370, and we do not say Avinu Malkeinu because it's Shabbos. So I say we jump to 370, but we don't actually say Avinu Malkeinu because it's Shabbos. Again, we're skipping the full Kaddish on page 374. And then we do the Yom. So the Yom for Shabbat obviously would be on page 384. And where it says there on the bottom of 384, some congregations recite Psalm 27, the David. At this point, Beth Shalom does that. We do it right here at this point. But like I said, it's not actually here in the Machzor. It's really in the Machzor on page 590, which is at the end of Musaf. If you say it at the end of Musaf, that's also okay. Don't overly complicate yourselves. It doesn't matter. Just do that Beth Shalom. We do it that way. When you're at home davening, there's nothing wrong with doing LeDavid later on when it's in the place of the Machzor. And by the way, won't go wrong with these things. It doesn't matter exactly. None of these things, the exact order. Shuls get all bent out of shape over these things because we have minhagim. Our shul goes back 115 years or whatever it is. We have all these customs that have compiled over the years, that have gathered up over the years. But when you daven at home, halachically, just to complete the davening, you'll follow along the Machzor and it will be fine. Okay. On page 386, when we do what we often refer to the Torah, the service, the part of the service where we're taking the Torah out, you're not going to have a Torah to take out, obviously, right? But if you want to say those words, you want to sing Av Harachamim, Vayihi, so there's nothing wrong with singing them. There's no halachic. It's not like Kaddish or Kedusha that you can't do without a minyan. So if you want to do it, if it feels right, go ahead and do it. You don't have to do it because we're not literally taking out the Torah when you're at home, but there's nothing wrong with actually doing it. On Shabbos, by the way, we don't do the Hashem Kal Rachem V'Chanan on the bottom of 386, where we say Hashem Kal Rachem V'Chanan. We don't do that on Shabbos. Torah is taken out. Again, obviously, you won't have a Torah. It's not halachically required to read it from a Chumash, but why not? You've got a long day, And that's the whole idea. So to the extent that you could read the story, you don't even need to take a chumash out. You have it right here in your machzor on pages 398 through 420. You have all of the readings, the Torah reading, the Haftorah reading. One thing that you would obviously not do is you wouldn't do Baruch Hu. You wouldn't do the blessings before and after the Torah. You wouldn't do the blessing before and after the Haftorah, but you could read the Haftorah itself. You just don't read the blessing from before and after, since you're not in a minyan and it's not part of a minyan service. But you still could do all of the readings. I have in this guide, and like I said, I'll send it out because apparently I'm not able to share it well, but I have like different kavanot for things that you hear, kavana for Shachris. You know, I say for the first day, I have a kavana for the first day. The Torah, Haftorah, bring up Sarah, Rachel, and Chana as different examples of women who were infertile, who were not able to have kids. But Rivka is interestingly not included in the women that were remembered on Rosh Hashanah. Why? What's different about Rivka's story than Sarah, Rachel, and Chana? I'm just putting different things down. I was trying to think of different kavanot that people can have, or different kinds of questions that they can ask themselves. Obviously, add your own and do what feels right. So that's for Shachris, the first day. After Torah reading and Haftorah, which again, you can just read the stories inside. On the first day, we would say Yukum Porkan on page 424. Actually, Art Scroll there says explicitly, when you're davening alone, you omit the final two paragraphs on page 424. You only do the top paragraph. And then the part that everyone's waiting for is the blowing of the shofar. But it's the first day, we're not going to blow the shofar. No blowing of the shofar. So you're going to skip from page 426 all the way to Ashrei on page 436. And now you're in Musaf. Do Ashrei. Again, if you want to read the sections about putting the Torah back, feel free. On the bottom of, there's no halachic problem with reading them, even though there's no requirement, because we're not actually putting the Torah away. And then Musaf proper would start on page 440. And I actually wrote a little kavana for this one. If you see here where my cursor is, Hineni on page 440. When we start Musaf, this is the first big piece, if you will, by a chazan, Hineni, where the chazan says, "Here I am before you. I am he'ani mimas," which means I am poor of deeds. The chazan's basically saying, I'm not worthy to do this job. I'm not up to the task. But what can I do? The people have sent me. So would someone who's davening on their own do this piece? On the one hand, you might say, no, why don't you skip it? You're not a chazan. You're just davening by yourself. But I wrote here, and of course, there's nothing halachically wrong with saying it. And I wrote, Hineni is usually said by the chazan. It's a prayer about a chazan being the agent of the congregation. When davening alone, what would it mean for part of yourself to be an agent for the rest of you? How can you access that on Rosh Hashanah? What does that mean that we're asking? Is it even possible to talk about the idea of having a shliach tzibur when we're davening by ourselves? In other words, in some way, are we still an agent perhaps for the rest of us, for the rest of our family, for Klal Yisrael, for the Jewish people? And I think that we should, again, as challenging and as hard as it is to be alone on Rosh Hashanah, but it takes us out of our box in a certain way. Like when we're sitting there in shul and the chazan's leading all the davening, and it can get a little passive sometimes. But when you're at home, the whole davening rests on you. It's all on your shoulders. You're the one who has to carry it. And in a certain sense, you have to be the chazan. That doesn't matter, men or women, it has nothing to do with anything about who could be a chazan. It's just you are your chazan, basically. And when you're the chazan and you're leading for yourself and maybe for your family or whatever it is, what does that mean? So I think that actually the tefillah of Hineni will probably take on a very, very interesting meaning for people this year. And I really focus people to pay attention to the words. But again, normally we think about them, it's like we're almost like overhearing the chazan like admitting that he's not worthy. And it feels like very voyeuristic in a certain way, I feel sometimes in the chazan, especially a chazan who's really emotionally in tune with this and is maybe even coming to tears. during Hineni. Hineni is a prayer that Chazanim get very, very into because you say, I'm not worthy, I'm unqualified, I'm ashamed of my deeds. And the Chazan's like saying this stuff out loud. It feels a little voyeuristic. What does it mean for me to be ready? And I think that the idea of us saying this on our own, I think it could actually be very powerful. Anyways, after Hineni is over, in Shul there'd be a half Kaddish on the bottom of 442. Obviously at home you skip it. And then you go to the Musaf Amidah. And that's going to be Musaf for you, the Amidah. There is no repetition. And that's another thing that I would encourage people to do. Normally we have to kind of save ourselves, right? We have to budget our emotional investment throughout the davening. If you put everything you have into the silent Amidah, you're not going to have anything left for the repetition, right? And the repetition is an hour and a half. It's on a regular Shabbat, on a regular Rosh Hashanah morning. You have to budget your emotional investment in prayers, I almost feel like, as you're going through davening. But for this year, if you're at home, your Musaf is your Amidah. It's your silent Amidah. So you can really, use it and put everything you can into it. Now, there's no, so the silent Amidah goes from page 444 all the way to page 464, right? Now, as I mentioned, there isn't going to be a repetition. But think about it. When people come to Shul for Rosh Hashanah, especially Musaf, when they think about Musaf, they probably think about Unisana Tokef, right? Which if you start in the repetition starts on page 466. They're thinking about Unisana Tokef, which is on page bottom of 476. They're thinking about after Kedusha on page 486, there's a beautiful tefillah, V'chol ma'aminim. These are like the highlights besides for the shofar blowing. And these things are not going to be in your Amidah if you are davening at home. But I'm going to say the same thing that I said for Shacharis. And here it's even more important because just looking at a lot of people probably only make it, maybe at the end of Shacharis with Torah reading and for Musaf. Musaf takes on a much bigger role for people on Rosh Hashanah. You don't have to give up on those highlights, even though they're in the repetition, and there is no repetition when you daven by yourself. There's nothing wrong, and it's absolutely appropriate and should be done, in my opinion. Pull those things out. So after you're done with your silent Shmona Esrei, right, after you get it to page 464, even though now you're really done, and now you can just jump to, Ein Kelokeinu, and Aleinu, and Adon, you're done really now, right? And you could do that. If you're not feeling anymore, that's okay. But if you want, now would be a time to just pull out of the repetition some of the highlights. And again, the highlights that I would point to would be Unitana Tokef. It's right there in your little cheat sheet that I'm gonna send out. That's on my screen, 476 to 480. And also V'chol ma'aminim. Those I think are probably two of the highlights in terms of the repetition of the Amidah of Musaf, and those things obviously can be said. Then after you're done, again, you don't have a repetition, you just did the silent, that's where you spent most of your energy. Maybe you said afterwards Unisana Tokef. Maybe if you still had more energy and you wanted to say V'chol ma'aminim, you did it. Again, all the page numbers are right there. There's no full repetition. There's no Kohen's blessing, even if you happen to be a Kohen or your spouse is a Kohen and you're davening together as a couple. There's no Birchas Kohanim if there is no minyan. You just can't do it. So that's one of the restrictions. But then afterwards, you would skip to the end of the davening, which would be picking up on the bottom of page 576, 578. Again, all the page numbers are in that document for Ein Kelokeinu, for Aleinu, and if you didn't do LeDavid before, at the end of Shacharis, right before the Torah reading, you would do LeDavid now on page 590. So that's basically Musaf. The big difference, obviously, is that there's no repetition. Anyone have any thoughts or questions about Musaf or anything else or any other concerns as we continue here? Okay. All right, so if we jump now to day 2, everything's basically going to be the same. If there's something that's, particularly different, I'll point it out. Obviously, some of the big differences will be because it's not Shabbat day 2. I'm sorry. I was only up to Musaf of day 1. If you now go to this middle column, we have Mincha of day 1. Mincha of day 1 is a little bit different in Shul because we would actually have a Torah reading because it's also Shabbat. And of course, you are more than welcome to read the reading. It would be Ha'azinu, and you can find it right there in your Machzor. There's the silent prayer. The Mincha repetition is really no big deal. On Yom Kippur, it's a bigger deal, but on Rosh Hashanah, it's really not that big of a deal. It's really just a direct repetition of the silent. It's true, there's no Kedusha for those of you who are at home, but basically the same. Avinu Malkeinu could be said without a minyan. The only problem is that it's Shabbos, so there's no Avinu Malkeinu said. So remember, no Avinu Malkeinu. And we don't do Tashlef this year on day 1. Why don't we do Tashlef on day 1? Because it's Shabbos. The custom is not to say Tashlef on Shabbos. So Tashlef could either be done on day 2. If you're trying to avoid crowds, I would say probably don't go to like that place on Greenleaf where there's a creek there, because there probably will be a bigger crowd there. And you can do Tashlech for sure through all Aseret Simei Tshuva, and some say you could even do it all the way up to Hoshana Rabbah, right before Shmini Atzeres Simchas Torah. So don't feel pressure if you can't do it on Rosh Hashanah. You could do it during the week. You can drive somewhere. You can drive to your favorite creek, your favorite body of water, and you could do Tashlech at your leisure. You don't have to worry about doing it on Rosh Hashanah itself. Okay, so that's Mincha for Shabbos day. Then we have Mariv on Shabbos, on Motzai Shabbat. Mariv on Motzai Shabbat. Okay. By the way, when davening Mariv on Motzai Shabbat, you don't have to wait till the stars come out to daven Mariv. You can daven Mariv earlier. You can certainly daven Mariv as early as Shkia, which is about approximately 7:15 or so. It's in the times that we sent out. You can even daven earlier, especially if you're at home and you want to have a dinner a little bit earlier. You can daven Marv earlier, even though Shabbat is even not over, you're able to do it. So you have Marv on the second night. One of the special insertions for Marv on the second night, if you go to page 86 in your Machzor, this is the Shmona Esrei, the Amidah for Marv for both nights. But when you're doing it on the second night, you should add in the paragraph called Vatodienu, which is all about, it's kind of like a mini Havdalah, which is in the middle of your Shmona Esrei. And that's it. Nothing else is special about Mariv. Then, if we jump over to the second day of Rosh Hashanah, Sunday, everything is the same, except there are no insertions for Shabbat. And we do Avinu Malkeinu, because it's Sunday. The Torah reading, the Haftarah readings are there. Torah reading is, of course, the special reading about the sacrifice of Isaac. So a little kavanah that I put in there, and I sprinkled these kavanot throughout the document here is, as you read all about the Akedah of Yitzchak, think about what sacrifice you have made for Judaism throughout your life. And are there specific ones that maybe you made this past year and ones that you might have to make this coming year? Now it's shofar blowing time. You didn't blow shofar on day 1, but you are going to blow the shofar. If you happen to have a shofar and know how to blow it, you can blow the shofar in the way that it's described in the Machzor. Hold on 1 second, let me just find the page. On page 432. But if you don't have it, don't worry about it. Do not worry about the fact that you're going to be in the middle of davening and all of a sudden it's going to say Tkiyah Shofar. Don't worry about it. You'll be able to hear the shofar in the afternoon. There are all the times that are listed when you're able to hear the shofar. including one in the Beth Shalom parking lot later in the afternoon at 3 o'clock, including shofar blowings throughout the neighborhood in a schedule that's been sent out, will be sent out a bunch more times. And if you didn't get it, please email me or Rabbi Cooper, and we'll get them to you, the exact list. But anyways, if you have to have a shofar, that will be one of the differences for day 2, that you're going to blow the shofar. Same thing, I would say, pull out 1 piyut or 2 piyutim. Again, Unisana Tokef is always a favorite one. That's one that you can do. No Birkat Kohanim. You do not blow the shofar during the San Amidah, even if you happen to have one. For Kavana for the second day, what I put here is try to find somewhere in the repetition, in the Musaf of the second day, do it during the first day, one line that really speaks to you very much in terms of your religion. Try to find something new in the davening, and that it could maybe be like a motto for your year. What would be your religious motto for your year? Maybe you can find something. Obviously, this has been a very, very difficult and challenging year, and we don't really know what's up ahead for us. And the idea of trying to find something in the davening that can kind of ground us for the year, I think would be a very powerful thing. So definitely something that I'm going to be trying to do throughout my davening. But basically, other than that, you have the machzor, the page numbers, everything's exactly the same. I don't know if I have anything to add more than the machzor. Annette says, what about Havdalah on Saturday night? So Havdalah, you don't make a special Havdalah on Saturday night. It's actually in the Kiddush. So if you open up your machzor, by the way, if someone does not have a machzor, you're able to pick them up from Shul. An email went out. A number of emails have gone out with the exact hours. I don't remember them right now of when you can pick them up. But if you want that information, let me know. I'll get you the information exactly when you can pick up a machzor, so you can have a machzor. The machzor really is your guide for everything on Rosh Hashanah and also Yom Kippur. But we'll do a special class the week in between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur to talk about that. But anyways, if you look in Kiddush on page 108, so for Friday night, you're going to add the first paragraph, Yom HaShishi, but then for Saturday night, you add the gray box on 110. So there's no separate Havdalah as a Havdalah. Havdalah is inserted in the Kiddush. And it describes right there on page 110 what to do, okay? You could either have 2 candles. Some people just look up at the light that they have in their house, or they use the Shabbos candles. And you have some candles that you look at. You do the same thing that you do, Baruch Atah Hashem, looking at Machlon Borei Mereish, and you put your fingers to try to benefit from the light a little bit, and then you do the last paragraph there. So basically, essentially, what happens is Havdalah is inserted into the Kiddush. Second day for Mincha is the same. Marv is weekday, and then Sunday night Havdalah. There is a Havdalah, and you can find it on page 674. Ooh, that's from before. Hold on a second. Havdalah is on page 674. So I don't know. That's just like a general outline. I sat down to write this, and I actually used as my model, because we sent one of these out for Shavuos, and we sent one of these out for Pesach. And the interesting thing is that for Pesach and Sukkot, it actually had probably more information there. And the reason why it had more information is because you don't have a machzor. So, of course, there's a machzor for Pesach, but most people are using the siddur, and you're jumping around, Hallel, what page, we literally had to, and also then where all the readings there in the Chumash, we had to write all the different information there. But for Rosh Hashanah, the beautiful thing is when you have a machzor in front of you, it literally guides you step by step. There are some special rules about what happens at home, and I tried to go through some of those when you're davening at home, but there really is not that much more. David Lakin said, can you move the Yontif candles for Kiddush Havdalah? We generally don't move them. All you do is like let's say your candles are in a different room. All you do is, if you're in the middle of Kiddush, you just stand up in the middle of Kiddush, and when you make the bracha Borei Mereish, you just go over to where the candles are. That's at least how I grew up doing it. You just walk over to where the candles are, you say the bracha Borei Mereish, and then you go back to continuing with Kiddush. So you don't necessarily have to move the candles. Yeah, so I don't know, is anyone, I'm gonna stop the share so I can see people. Happy to share it again. And like I said, we'll send it out. Anyone have any questions before I just conclude with some closing remarks? But anyone have any questions about any parts of the davening or anything about being at home throughout Rosh Hashanah? Obviously, this is such a challenging idea, such a challenging concept of being home for people who probably never, even for 1 year, missed shul completely over Rosh Hashanah. And now there will be many people who will be in that situation. So if you have any question about it, please don't hesitate. You can ask either in the chat or just unmute yourself and ask. And then afterwards, I have some closing words that I want to say. Okay. All right. So my closing thought is something that I've really just been meditating upon and really thinking a lot about in terms of Rosh Hashanah this year. It was also true about Shavuos. It was also true about Pesach. It's like, it's so different and it's so hard, and there's already so much in our life which has been disrupted. And I think that we really need to think about davening and Judaism and everything that our tradition in general. Of course, it's a set of responsibilities and obligations. That's of course true, and everyone wants to do the best they can. But these things are meant to anchor us, to support us, to give us connection. And the actual halachic requirements are very, very minimal. So much of what we do, so many of the piyutim, so many aspects are minhag, they're custom, and they're meant to help us. They're meant to give us a deeper connection. But if it just becomes one more thing that then gives us even more stress, oh, what am I going to do? In addition to that, I need to have this. I need to have this food. You know, you go through the simanim, you look on page 112, there are all these foods. I got to run around to 12 stores now on Erev Rosh Hashanah, and where can I find this food or that food? I don't think that was, the intention. These things were meant and placed there and as part of our customs and traditions in order to help us feel deeper connection, and to make Yontif more meaningful and special and full of the customs that we're used to. But this year, if those things or any of those aspects become more challenging, you don't do them. It's okay. These are customs. Obviously, shofar, we do whatever we can to hear the shofar. If for whatever reason we're in a situation where we can't be in shul, we're too far away to hear the shofar, we don't have access to a shofar, then you are exempt this year, 100% halachically exempt from the shofar. And I'm going to make a statement. I mean, it's hard for me to, you'll probably still feel like you're missing the shofar, but from a halachic perspective, from a Jewish responsibilities and obligations perspective, no one should think that they're missing something, that they're not doing something that they're supposed to be doing. That is what they're supposed to be doing this year. If you have to be at home to stay safe, to stay healthy, and that means not even being able to hear the shofar this year, then that's what it means. And then, they'll be next year. And it's not meant, at least from my perspective, to be yet another thing. All of these things, I'm worried about parnasa, I'm worried about livelihood, I'm worried about health, I'm worried about this and that, and all the different things, and where my family is and my parents or my kids, I'm worried about all, and then I'm also worried about the fact that, I can't hear the shofar, or I can't hear, it's the first time I'm not gonna be able to do that. That doesn't mean that it doesn't hurt that you can't do those things. But it shouldn't be like, oh, here's another thing that I have to do, and that, of course, we won't be able to do. We're not going to be able to do everything. And I'll conclude with the thought that I've been thinking a lot, which is, it's not going to be perfect this year, obviously, or anywhere near perfect, but it's going to be perfect for this year in the sense that this is what we're supposed to do this year. This is just what it is. And then the question is, how within the constraints and with what it is going to be, how can we make it have as much meaning as possible? The other thing I would say is, since we are davening home, it's a complete disruption in terms of what we normally do. And that's a bad thing, of course, because we like our routine and we like what we're used to experiencing. And the reason why the davening is meaningful in a certain way is sometimes because it's the boring, it's the same old, the same tefillah, it's the same Unasana Tokef that we've been saying all these years, the same tefillot, the same Kedusha, the same thing that we've been saying all along. But on the other hand, with that repetition of year in, year out, also in a certain way, maybe it loses some of its meaning. And if there's anything about this year, mostly it's not good, but if there's anything about this year is that it's not going to be the same. And that kind of forces us to think outside the box and really forces us to try to see, how can I find meaning in something that I've been doing all the time in a certain way, and now I'm doing it a different way, and that maybe gets us to have different kinds of appreciation. I'm not going to say deeper but I'll say different. Maybe there are ways to get different kinds of appreciations from it. So anyways, those are some of my thoughts for Rosh Hashanah. I guess if I could say anything, my biggest point would be, we're available. Rabbi Cooper's available. I'm available. If we can help in any way. If anything I just said didn't make 100% sense or you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out by email or any other way. We will send out that document, but if you want me to send it to you directly, don't hesitate right after the class, send me an email. I'm sure I'll be able to figure out a way to send it. If I send it to you directly, I think it's just because when I'm sharing it in the chat box, that's why it's not working. But more than happy to send to you that document. If you did not get the shofar schedule for Sunday, for all the shofar blasts, there are like 25 or 30 of them around the community. Many shofar blasts are going to be happening around the community. I can send it to you directly. And if you didn't get any of the emails or any of these things, please let me know and we'll be able to help you. Okay, wishing everybody a Shana Tova. So good to see you. If I don't see you again, Shana Tova. People they're more than welcome to stay on, chat with people, chat with each other. But I'll see you later. I actually have to run to something else right now, so I'm gonna mute myself, but I will leave the room open if anyone wants to stay on. Okay, have a good day, everyone. Thank you.